Welcome to Musicians Peer Support, everybody. Today, none other than the legend Bob Horn. Everybody, give it up, Bob Horn. But isn't Bob Horn amazing? But not only does Bob Horn have the catchiest name, he's also got the accolades. And we always say accolades are not. We're all humans. And what I appreciate about Bob, like I said earlier before we started the recording, is the humanness, the genuine authenticity that Bob always carries in my personal interactions with him. So, Bob, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, doing very good. Thank you.
I
And
see
thanks for
you're,
having me again.
of course, of course. I see you're in your studio.
Yeah,
And we're going
most
to
of the
talk a
time.
little bit about that in a minute. So everybody, please get your questions ready because Bob, you're okay to answer some questions a little bit later, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No
Cool. Well,
problem.
first though, I'd love to hear about your background. We usually start these interviews talking about where people grew up and if music was involved, if it was involved, because I know you're a talented musician. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I started playing music probably like most people around fifth grade. Like at our school system, you had to choose between either orchestra, choir, or band, concert band, and I chose band. And my dad gave me his tenor saxophone that he had as a kid, and I played saxophone in the band. And then a couple of years later, I joined the school's jazz band and just started learning more and more about other instruments like bass, drums, and guitar. And um, I think in seventh grade, I ended up having my sister had an exchange student for a year from Ecuador, and his name was Sebastian. Sebastian played the drums, so my dad got us a cheap drum kit, and then kind of like the family jam sessions started, and I started learning drums, and I already was playing on like my grandpa's piano, and next thing you know, by the time I got into high school, I was playing five or six instruments, guitar, drums, bass, piano, sax, marimba, and marching band, and um, quads and snare and marching band, as well as saxophone. And so I was just getting so much musical experience. And then I had after school bands like rock bands or punk bands or whatever. I was in about four after school bands by the time I graduated. And every day of the week, I was come home from school and do something with music until dinner time. And
Wow.
then, of course, after dinner, and then no time for homework, I'm sure. But yeah, yeah, and then everyone at my school kind of knew I was going to do something in music. I went to a small high school. I think my class was 93 kids. Total high school is like 400, which
Oh.
I've heard is a lot smaller than a lot of high schools.
Mhm.
And ended up going to Berkeley College of Music, and ended up going into their MP&E program, music production and engineering. And I kind of did an unofficial double major of electric bass and MP&E. And I just did that by testing out of a bunch of courses. Like in high school, I had interned at some studios and got a head start learning about the technology. And I did sound for my church and installations of live sound and stuff like that, equipment and all that. So I kind of got a head start on everything. So by the time I got to Berkeley, I was able to kind of advance into some of the music classes and the engineering stuff and pack in more education in the 4-year period. So
Wow.
yeah, go ahead.
That's a lot. So was the very first instrument that you really dug into saxophone?
Yeah. Fifth grade. Yeah.
Wow.
Three
Was there
Blind Mice and all those kind of songs.
Yeah, yeah. So, did you start with the recorder? Because we started with the recorder when we were
Oh,
growing up.
yeah, but I back then that was probably what, like second grade or
Yeah,
third grade, and I didn't take that seriously.
right.
Like,
Okay. So, because I was gonna say there was something about the saxophone that appealed to you. And you said it was mainly there was an influence. What was it about the saxophone that appealed to you
we just had
initially?
one. My dad had one in the family, and
Okay.
when I was given the choice of being in choir or orchestra or concert band,
Mm,
choir meant you had to sing, and I was always nervous to sing. I was too shy to sing. And
gotcha.
then orchestra seemed like classical music, and as a, whatever age I was, 10 years old, 8 years old, I don't even remember the age. Like I just it just didn't seem appealing to play classical music. So my dad had a saxophone, and that aligned with concert band, and that's what I wanted
Right.
to do. So
Yeah.
I went for saxophone.
Yeah, because I mean, it definitely helped that your dad had one. But I remember in my experience, saxophone was the coolest out of all the instruments to choose. In fourth grade, they
Oh
have
yeah,
you choose all the instruments, and saxophone was kind of the coolest one. But very
yeah.
shortly after that, you were playing everything. So one thing that I realized about myself recently is that I was kind of a little session player in high school. I had all these different kind of gigs
Oh
doing
yeah.
different things. It sounded like you had a similar experience because you had a bunch of bands and then you were in the different ensembles in high school. So did it feel like you kind of had that gig atmosphere through high school?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah, for sure. I mean, I didn't recognize what it was, like, relating
Exactly.
to a session. I didn't even know what a session meant back then, but,
Right.
yeah, definitely, yeah.
Different instruments call for different um kind of skill sets, really. So you got to have a pretty versatile skill set by the time you got to Berkeley. And so that's of course, like you were saying earlier, all the other experience with working in studios, you got to test out of a lot of things and get a bit of a jump start, right? So how did that
Absolutely.
experience help you in the professional world? Like you kind of had an advantage because of what you had been through. So were you working early then? Was this being a profession pretty automatic after high school?
Yeah, I mean, right after high school, I went to college for 4 years, but, in high school, I had a job at a studio, and I interned at another studio, and so, and then when I went to Berkeley, I already had a head start, and then right out of Berkeley, I went and started to be a intern and assistant at the studios in Nashville, and so yeah, it was just pretty fluid.
So the
Once I knew that
internships,
engineering,
so in the studios that you were in Cincinnati. You started in
yeah,
Cincinnati doing those, and then Nashville.
absolutely, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, Cincinnati, and then I went to Berkeley, which is in Boston, and then
Yeah,
after Berkeley, I went down to Nashville before I
gotcha.
came to LA.
And you started to say
Uh-huh.
something about how you started to get a little bit more of a passion for the engineering side, huh?
Sorry, repeat the question one more
Were
time.
you
My
saying
Wi-Fi
something
was.
about how you were getting into more of the engineering part of it? At a certain point, you started to find a passion for that?
Yeah. Yeah, just throughout high school doing sound at the church, you're working with microphones and mixing boards and all that stuff. And then my bands after school, we got a PA system, and then we got a 4-track recorder, and we had to figure out how to record ourselves. And then we would save up money and go into an actual studio, and then learn about that. And so I really got into it just from a, musically, I wanted to record myself in my bands, and then technically, I was enjoying that aspect of it. So just the both kind of collided together, and there's a little bit of computers happening, but I didn't know if I was too into that as far as like synth and sequencing and all that kind of stuff. And then once I got into those internships in high school, at the studios, I kind of realized like that's what I'm gonna do. Like I
Mhm.
like recording bands and being behind the board and making
Yeah.
stuff sound good. So
Wow.
um, I kind of knew probably about sophomore, junior year what I was gonna go do.
Wow. The bands that you had in high school, were you playing guitar in those bands or it was all different?
I it was all different. So there was a band I played drums, there was a band I played keyboards, and then there was a band where I switched off guitar and bass, and might have been one other band, I forget. But
Anything we would want to look
um,
up?
no, nope.
Okay.
I don't
Uh,
know. I don't even think you could, but I don't think it's out there.
right.
I think the furthest we got was printing up cassettes that we would give to other students at school. So I
Yeah.
think I have one in my safe, but I don't have a cassette player to play it on.
Yet.
Yeah,
How did you find yourself? Because you're in LA now, right?
yeah.
How'd
I came
you,
here in 2001 after going to Nashville first out of school. I
Gotcha.
went to Nashville for 3 years.
Did you have your own studio in Nashville?
Shit. Sorry, am I back?
Okay.
Okay, so I'll say the question one more time.
Did you have your own studio in Nashville also?
No, I didn't have my own studio till about 2007, and that one was really someone else's, and I was leasing one room out of it. But yeah, I just worked in the sorry, let me
Good.
cancel this call. I was getting a call. Yeah, I just worked in all the big studios around town. So, you know, if someone said, "Hey, can you do a session?" I'd be like, "Yeah, where do you want to work?" And they would tell me, "Oh, record plant." We would go there and work. And then around 2007, I found a client that had an open room, and I was mixing their records, and they were spending a crazy amount of money on just taking a lot more time than they needed to mix a record. And I went over and saw their studio, and they had this empty room. And I was like, you know what? If you let me set up in here, I could save you a lot of money on your records that I do for you. And then the rest of the time, I could work on my own stuff. So I was at that studio, which is also in LA, for about 3 years. And then the Echo Bar happened in 2011 with one of my best friends, Eric Rikers. So we built this in 2010, 2011, and been here ever since.
Amazing. I hope to one day see it. Wow. Do you mind if we dig into some shop talk here a little bit?
Yeah, for sure.
So we've spent a lot of time on Clubhouse, like I mentioned earlier. We got a lot of questions from all different kinds of people, and I got to observe all of your answers. And one common question was for people who who are just getting started in working in recording studios. You know, maybe you want to get a job as an engineer, a producer, you know, basically even as an admin, or just kind of get your foot in the door in a recording studio. Or maybe you're a producer and you want to open your own studio one day. Or maybe you're learning engineering and you want to learn producing. But how do you get to the big time? Like how does somebody who's learning this stuff, maybe even really well equipped with a good education, how do you get started in working in a studio?
Well, is my video back on?
Not yet.
Okay, sorry.
It's all good. Did we lose him? We'll get him back. Let me pause the recording 1 second.
Okay.
So, Bob, before you left, we were talking about how to get started in a studio. Somebody wants to either open their own studio, or maybe just start working in a studio. How does one put their, get their start?
Basically, it depends. Like, if you want to go the route, like the traditional engineer's route of being an intern, which leads to being an assistant, which leads to being, you know, an engineer eventually, you basically just apply for an internship, and you'll have a better chance if you do have, like, if you did go to an engineering school or a school with an engineering program. And you know, yeah, basically the only thing you have to do is apply for an internship. It takes the internships, it'll probably take about a year or a year and a half as being an intern, you know, scrubbing toilets, all that kind of stuff before you become an assistant. And that just usually happens when there's an opening or the owner wants to give you a chance because he believes in you, stuff like that. I mean, that's how it was years ago. And I think there's less of that happening now, but yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of big studios around. And I know they still pretty much operate the same way, but
Yeah.
it's really just about applying for the internship, you know.
And we have a couple of questions from some people, some of my friends and some members that I got over the course of the last few weeks. But what do you think, Bob, about people who are recording at home, everything is in the laptop and we're mixing and mastering things, where you know that musicians peer support, we have a lot of people who are into this whole sync licensing, and sometimes it
Yeah.
can get a little bit pricey to outsource some of these things. So we have to widen and expand our skill sets to include mixing and mastering sometimes to just save our business some money. What do you think about somebody doing that all on their own?
I mean, I think it's important. It's definitely easy nowadays with the tools that exist. That's not something you could do, you know, when I was first starting out. It's like the equipment costs too much, and you'd have to make a pretty substantial investment at for a home studio that would be, worth anything, you know, to get a decent recording. Um, but now I think it's there's so many people doing music. Um, it would just be impossible to not do it that way. And like you said, like back in the day, people would pay engineers. A cheap engineer would be 25 an hour, and a pro engineer would be 100 an hour. And it's like, who can afford that when they're just demoing a song at home? And even if they're doing a song for TV film and it's something that'll get synced later, but you're just making libraries of music, it's like you can't afford to hire someone in that capacity. Maybe if it's a large company, they could do that if they have staff producers and they have a staff engineer. My friend just got hired as a staff engineer at Warner Chapel, and
Nice.
so he mixes all of the producers' music, but that's kind of a luxury top level sync situation.
Yeah.
So um everyone else, that's not on that level or working for a company that's on that level, needs to be able to have those skills. And I think it's good because when you understand how to work that equipment, whether it's a laptop with a DAW, usually is, and maybe a microphone and a mic pre, you understand what goes into a recording better, and you get deeper into production, and you're not just a musician anymore. You actually become a producer and an engineer, and then you can, when you are in situations where you collaborate with other people, you can communicate better. So I think it's very important. And we have the best tools available to us and access to the most music, and it's given people, just a with great ease, they can get a song out in the same day they wrote it, recorded it if they really wanted to.
Yeah, it's ultimately a good thing. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Loudness wars. That was a really interesting conversation back in the day, with all of you pros talking about where things should fit. And then, we hear this term broadcast quality, and then, love wars, loudness wars. So what's your take on where things should fit right now? Like when people are let's say, yeah, in this situation where we got to mix and master, we're doing everything on our own. Here it is. Here's my master. Is there a certain level that we should be keeping our master at? What are some of the things in terms of loudness that we should be thinking about?
Well, the key to loudness is a thing called crest factor, which is the I don't know what word to use, whether it's the volume between the quietest part of the signal and the loudest peak part of the signal. And the closer those two numbers are, the better crest factor you have, and louder a song or a sound will be. And speaking of that, there are loud sounds and there are not loud sounds, and then of course that leads to loud or not loud mixes. So if you're choosing a bass drum, a sample, a kick drum or something, and it has a very good crest factor, it's already going to be easy to get that kick drum loud because the peak isn't so loud. So it's going to have loudness is an appearance of volume. So um, a level can technically be -10, but you could have a -10 that's very loud and a -10 that's seemingly not so loud.
Hmm.
So it's a tricky thing, and what a lot of beginners do is they grab a limiter and they pull the threshold down. Let's say just take a plugin that's a limiter. You could say like Waves L2 or something, and they yank that threshold down until they reach the number they're going for. And that's a quick and dirty way to do it. It's not going to be effective or sound good every time, because they're missing the point of the crest factor, which comes into play with the mixing and balancing of the faders and treating each sound along the way to get to the final level of the overall song. So if you have just drums, and you have, or let's say drums and bass, and your bass is really boomy, and that's keeping you from getting a loud level, and your kick is very peaky, very dynamic, your snare is extra loud, so it's just keeping you from getting your overall mix loud, because the individual elements are not loud themselves. Their crest factor is very poor. So as far as numbers, I shoot to get every mix at least to 10, -10 LUFS. If I can hit 8 or 7 and still enjoy the sound, and recognize that it's still a good mix and a dynamic mix, and the client's not going to complain of it sounding squashed, then I'll go there. I've had a couple instances where I get up to 6 and -5, but that's because the arrangement of the song led to that, or the heavy elements, the way that they were kind of pre-baked, engineered, they were very kind of light, so it allowed me to get more volume. So low end is the biggest energy. If you look at your master fader in your DAW, you look at the meter, and you solo a hi-hat, it's going to fill up maybe this much. You solo a kick drum, it's going to fill up the whole thing, So low end is a lot more powerful, and we all like bass. It's fun to hear, exciting bass, but you have to be careful. And I've definitely in my career had some nice bass heavy mixes that sounded cool, but they were so quiet because it just wasn't done right. And once I started paying attention to loudness and not just leaving it to a mastering engineer, then it took me a couple of years, maybe 3 years, just to get mixes to where I'm competitively loud, and the mix is still exactly how I want it to sound. It's definitely not a setting on a plugin or a simple trick you can just do on the master fader. It's really a throughout thing with all the sounds. A producer can choose a sound that just keeps the whole mix from getting loud, and then you have to do some creative things to combat that. And sometimes a certain mix just won't get that loud without it being crunchy, or even distorted, or just compromised, and a lot of people just rely on compression and limiting on their stereo bus to achieve their loudness. But that's kind of that is the way to do it. But if that's all you do to try to get your loudness, it's kind of a hack way. And gain staging is another important factor.
And actually, that was my question. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I was going to ask about the gain staging. Go ahead.
Gain staging. So basically, anyone that doesn't know gain staging, just having proper levels throughout your session in every aspect. And that doesn't mean where the fader is on a sound. That means from the original sounds level, the recorded level, through each plugin, down to the level of the sound going to your output, your final stereo bus. All of that being a good level and gain staged well. So for instance, if I have a vocal and it's not clipping, it's not distorted, but it's not too low, it's just at a great level, let's say it's averaging -10, and the peaks don't clip and the quiet parts are still, nice and heard. So you start with that level and you put a compressor plugin. Well, if you compress that vocal and then crank the output, and now the level is different than when you bypass that plugin, that's poor gain staging. So for one, and if you keep doing that with a chain of like 5 or 6 plugins, and they're all changing the level dramatically, you're going to have problems. And that poor gain staging can lead to many problems where you could be distorting a reverb. So you could have an aux send that leaves the vocal to a reverb, and that's distorting the input to the reverb, even though it's not distorting on the actual vocal, because the gain staging is messed up. Maybe you raise the vocal too loud on an EQ plugin with the volume, but on a compressor, you ended up lowering it again. So it appears great, but as you bypass those plugins in different combinations, the level is all over the place. What you want is whatever goes into a plugin, the same level comes out, unless you're purposely trying to change the level, but then you need to have a good reason for doing that. So if it was recorded at a bad level and you want to change that level on your first plugin or raise the file, you know, in Pro Tools, you can clip gain an audio file and set a new level for that waveform, you know. But when you go down your plugins, you got compressors, de-essers, EQs, and limiters. As you bypass them, you want the level to remain very close. And obviously, if you're doing dynamic processing, the level might appear quieter because it's suddenly more dynamic. But I just mean you don't want a very loud vocal to suddenly become quiet and then another plugin make it loud again. You want to have those even. So, and the other thing is A/Bing. Like I'm an A/B mixer. So if I put on an EQ plugin, after I do my EQ, I'm gonna bypass it, bypass it, bypass it. I might even A/B individual bands on that EQ and see, oh, I have this dip in the mid range. Do I need that? But I like the other bit of the EQ, and I might A/B that mid range band and then decide I don't need it. But you just want to have a consistent level through all of that, you know.
Yeah. Wow. Great stuff. Thank you so much, Bob. A couple follow-up questions. You mentioned tools and plugins, and I believe this question was maybe from our friend Dan Luriano. I could be wrong, but that you talk a lot about that you're always learning and that you try new plugins and that, you know, people send you stuff that you really do. You're open to using new stuff, but
Yeah.
are there certain plugins that are your go-tos that always remain the same?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how many. I mean, let's say like there's probably 40 plugins that if you took everything else away from me, I would be okay. You know.
Right.
And they change. You know, some plugins I'll get them and I'll love them for a week or a couple months, and then I'll forget about it, or I'll have a long stint where I don't use it, and then I'll forget about it, and then or I'll find something better that replaces it. But just to rattle off some names. I also, just because of the people I know, and this isn't a brag, it's just something that happens. I get my hands on plugins early that aren't on the market. So
Yeah.
right now I'm using quite a few, that about 5 that don't exist yet, and
Oh,
they will soon.
great. Yeah. And I mean, if you're not allowed to tell us about it, then fine. But if you are
Well,
allowed to tell us,
those I can't, but
okay.
they're just but yeah, there's plenty of others that I like.
Marcus
I re-
Manderson says name 3 of them. I think he can name none of the
I can
5
name. The those 5. I can't. NDAs and all that.
right.
But
But you can name 3 of your faves.
oh yeah, I can name way more than that. But I like Soothe. Soothe is a great plugin, and I use it for more than just the high end on vocals, which I find is the most common use with people. I use it on low end, mid range, all that stuff. Golfos is a great one. The Plugin Alliance bundle, I like a lot of plugins inside that. I like the 902 Lindell de-esser. I like the SPL Pass EQ, the Brainworks Townhouse compressor. It's that's a bus compressor, but I actually like that on vocals. One of my favorite vocal compressors ever, and it's going to be hard to replace it, is the Al Schmidt Leapwing plugin. Leapwing is a company that isn't as widely known as, say, like UAD or Waves, but Leapwing's algorithms just sound fantastic. They have so they have the Al Schmidt plugin and the vocal compressor. It's just a single knob compress, and if you have a 0 to 100, and I usually end up about 80, and it's beautiful. It's so good. It's like I don't even care that you don't have other controls like attack, release, ratio. I'm usually a control freak, but that compressor sounds so good to me. Also, Leapwing's Stage 1, it's a stereo widener, and it's the only stereo widener I know of that cancels perfectly to mono. So There's a couple producers I work with that really like wide stuff, and I'll get their tracks to mix, and I have to call them sometimes and have them reprint some of their mostly synthesizers like synths and keyboard parts. I have to tell them to reprint that without their widener because they go too wide, and then when you check it in mono, it's gone. Like the sound is not even there. But to them, in their rooms that are untreated and the speakers aren't positioned, it just sounds cool, But Leap Wings Stage 1 gets really wide and it'll cancel the mono no matter how wide you go. So I highly recommend that. There's a jillion plugins that are great.
That's amazing. Those are
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah, sure.
And just to let everybody know, we're getting close to time. So please, everybody, get your questions in now. If you do have any questions, you can type it in the chat. I'll be moderating that chat and you can raise your hand in Zoom. Bob, is there a difference between mixing hip hop and mixing pop? If so, what's the difference?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically just what the style of mixing that's currently in vogue. So, however, the masses of hip hop are doing their records. So obviously every artist and every mixer that does a mix is different. But let's take like trap music, like Atlanta. Oh, you could go. Okay, so there's trap. There's Out Here trap, LA, which is a little more clear, and then there's Atlanta trap, which is a little darker. But I actually love like the sound. Like Ari Morris is a great trap mixer, and he's actually out of Memphis, but he works for a lot of artists in Atlanta. But really, just recognizing the style. So if you're mixing hip hop and you kind of are in tune with what kind of effects people are using nowadays in hip hop versus, you listen to hip hop from 2005, it's way different than hip hop now. So just recognizing the differences. So pop right now is very clean, very clear, but not overly bright. Very, if you listen to Harry Styles or what's that? The guy that does Patient. I'm drawing a blank right now.
But
I can't remember. But
I know what you're saying about Harry Styles. There is a little bit of that grit, like an analog hint to it. It's like it's not all clean and shiny and
right, but the low end is very tight. Like there's not a lot of bass.
right.
Yeah, so I think the differences as far as between the two genres, I mean, right now it's I don't know. I just rather than go by what the differences are in the two genres, just go. I like to go by what is the trend right now, and do I want to do those trends or do my own? And so I might have a pop song that has more low end than a lot of pop songs out there, or has a drier vocal than The Weeknd or something like that. So I like to go by recognize the trends, know what's going on within a few month, couple year period, and then decide, based on what the artist wants, and if I have room to make my own decisions artistically, then what do we want, So,
right.
Yeah.
And are you A-Bing to another track when you're mixing?
Sometimes. So, but I do it for. So basically, if I put in a reference mix to A/B, what it is for me is an ear reset. So if I'm mixing all day, like let's say I'm mixing a pop song, a zillion tracks, and it's like the 9th hour I'm mixing. If I don't listen to something else, I might be making things too bright, or I might get paranoid about the brightness and make things too dark, or I might not be cleaning up enough mids. So having just a professional song that I like the mix of, or that I mean, the most importantly that I know. So as long as it's something I know, I can flip over to that and reset my ears and say, oh, I'm way too bright right now, or that vocal's way too bright, But I know other engineers will use a reference to match like reverbs or how loud something is in a track. And I tend to not do that. I tend to only use references as a reset. That way, every record for every artist is kind of their own thing. Um,
That's
you
great.
know, and that kind of leaves it so I can use anything as a reference. I could use a trap mix while I'm mixing a pop song.
Right.
Sorry, I'm getting a scam likely right now. Let me send that to voicemail.
That's such a great point. It doesn't have to be exactly to the T because you're using it for that purpose of like a palate
Yeah,
cleanser.
it just has to be something you know. You know, if you know something intimately, then it'll reset your ear. You know, yeah, stylistically, I've done that where I've had people in the room and I'll flip over to something and they're like, "Why are you using that song? We don't want to sound like that song." I'm like, "You're not gonna sound like that song." I just needed to hear what what's bright, what's bassy, what's tight. You know, like I just
Yes.
needed to remind myself. You know, because
Right.
the ear can get used to something really quick, and
Yeah.
next thing you know, you think it sounds good, and then you come back the next day and it's like, "Oh, what was I thinking?" You know,
Right, right.
so.
And we're gonna get into things like ear fatigue and self-care and all that in a minute, but we are getting close to time here. So I'm gonna get to some questions here, Bob, from the chat. Drift says, how do you achieve a 3D sound from virtual stems, i.e. components not being recorded in the same room at the same time?
Oh, well, it really, to me, doesn't matter whether they're recorded in the room together, whether they're virtual, anything. It's I have to do the same. I have to take the same care in the three. What would be the word? The 3D space. You
Yeah.
know, whether something's dry or not, and it's all about the effects you use and the level you place them at. So um, if you want something to appear more upfront, you can do that with compression and level, and not just reverb. And then, but also taking into account effects and reverbs and slap delays and Haas effect. Um, so being able to move something front to back and create a 3D soundstage can be done in so many different ways. And I think the key is not doing the same thing to every element. So let's take a piano, acoustic guitar, and a vocal, those three elements. So let's say I might have the vocal where I compress it with a fast release. So, and I'm compressing fairly hard, let's say 8 to 10 dB, which is pretty extreme. But when that compressor lets up, it's pushing the tail of the vocal, the quieter parts, right up. So the vocal's just in your face. Now I put reverb on it and I find a level with the reverb where it sounds wet and it has a nice, let's say a 2.5 second tail. Um, and it's sitting real good, but it still sounds up front. You know, and if you raise that level of that reverb return too loud, it starts to push the vocal back. So I find that magical space. Now I bring in the piano, and let's say I don't use the same reverb. Um, it's also stereo where the vocal will be up the center if it's a lead vocal. And that I might put on like a medium sized chamber. And then again, the fader level and the EQ, maybe how bright or how forward the mids are, will seemingly move it in the speakers. And then lastly, the guitar, let's say it was a finger style acoustic, I might keep that bright if the piano's dark so that they don't conflict with each other. And if it was mono, I might pan it slightly off the lead vocal, but let's say the piano is playing mostly mid to high notes, not a lot of low notes. And let's say the piano is the low side is on the left and the high side of the piano is on the right. Then I will put the guitar wherever the piano is least busy, which would be on the low side. So, and I might EQ that piano to pull out a little bit of low end, a little bit of extra low end, and then that guitar will just sit right in the right space. And then I'll find a new effect, maybe not even a reverb. Maybe I'll go with a short slap delay and mix it really low. So the acoustic is semi dry, but has some kind of space, but you don't quite know what it is. And maybe put a little bit of stereo effect in the other speaker, um, so that it appears like there's a little bit of stereo information, but it's not conflicting with the piano. So that's really the 3D stage. Talking about that is what mixing is. It's so many moves, millions of moves, different ways. I could take those same three elements and describe a whole different way of mixing. So
Right.
The fact that they're virtual, it could be a virtual guitar, virtual piano, and then a vocal sample, and you could still make them 3D. It's just about what you do in that mixing, you know.
Wow. And thank you. And it's carving. It's I love how you talk about small incremental changes to get to a place. You know, it's not like, you know, taking big chops out of it. Do you mix in mono or stereo? This is a question from the
Almost
chat. Mhm.
almost always stereo. I might, if something's super wide, I'll check it in mono to make sure there's no problems.
Mhm.
If I'm doing a song where all the backgrounds are panned 100 and 100, like full left, right, I will check that, because one time I did a song for NeYo and I had all the backgrounds left and right, and we thought we had them at the perfect level. And then we were in a studio lounge when the video came out, and the studio lounge TV had a little mono speaker in the right corner, and we couldn't hear the backgrounds. And in this song, the backgrounds were very important because they had their own lyrics when the lead wasn't singing. And that was a very big lesson for me, because in mono, those backgrounds just weren't popping through. So if I have a song and the backgrounds are very wide, or something important is very wide, I'll check mono to make sure that the level is like, I have, it's kind of an average. So it might be a little louder in the stereo than you think you want it, but you check the mono and it's a little lower, but it's just kind of, you just kind of average it, you know. But other than that, I don't spend any time in mono, so it's very little.
So do you ever check your mixes on an iPhone speaker?
I do.
You
Yeah,
do.
absolutely. Another scam likely.
Okay. This one's from Stu in Scotland. What is the most important influential moment in your career so far? The thing that had the biggest impact?
Wow. Huh. Jeez. Do I know what that is?
Well, I
Moment.
mean, you
I,
know,
was there a I mean,
was there a
identifying a
single moment?
single moment? I don't know that there was.
We're going to talk a little bit about some of the health changes you have made in your career, lifestyle wise. I mean, I don't know if you consider that you know, an important maybe the most influential, but it was probably an important moment. I don't know about
that could be. I would say things like, you know, if someone were to be thinking, you know, when you got a Grammy or when you got your first platinum plaque, like those moments, they don't happen how we portray them to people on our, like our Instagrams or something. Like you win the Grammy and you celebrate, and then you don't get it for 6 months in the mail. And when you do get it, the phone doesn't start ringing more. It's just something that you have. Because here's the thing just about accolades is, at a certain level in the industry, they're just expected. It's like, it would be more of an issue if you didn't have them. And it's like, oh, Craig Kalman from Atlantic wants me to do a mix and I don't have any accolades. Oh, well, you wouldn't have gotten that call. It's just like, well, of course he has accolades, because otherwise we wouldn't be talking to him, because he wouldn't be in the mix of the people that recommended him to so and so, you know. So as far as important defining moments, I don't know, like maybe just being in the right place, right time, like maybe how I met one of the first big producers, maybe that was a moment. But at that time I didn't think about it as a moment, you know. It's just something that was happening, and it led to 5 years of good credits and good work and propelling my career. So as I talk through it, I'm trying to figure it out, but I guess that's what I would have to go with.
Yeah, kind of a defining moment, because that kind of puts you in a certain direction, meeting up with that producer.
Yeah, I didn't work on like one big album and then everything exploded. Like it wasn't like that for me. It was like now 20 years of like, oh, you know, just amassing credits and meeting people and trying to do good work, you know. and then one thing leads to the next thing, you know.
The Grammys just roll in after that, huh?
I don't know about that, but
Thank you, Stu. So Ben Ellery, who's on our team, you might know Ben, Bob. Any tips on taming Spitfire Labs foghorn in a mix? Sounds massive solo, but masked in context without many other instruments competing in those frequencies.
well, you got to state that question again. I wait, say it one more time.
Any tips on taming Spitfire Labs foghorn in a mix?
What
Oh,
what
geez.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah. Ben, you want to elaborate on your question?
It's in its most basic, literally a foghorn. And one of the more challenging parts on it for me is it kind of dives the note down slowly as it goes. I thought it'd be great fun for EDM. Marcus saying in the chat for like trailer stuff. But
so this is a sound.
So an actual foghorn
sound.
sound, if you're trying to mix that in context.
Oh, so taming that, there could be so many ways. It could be like if it's edgy and painful, I would probably go for a plugin like Soothe, or working on maybe the range of frequencies between like 2 and 5K, and maybe trying to find some notches to pull them out. There's also, I'm into plugins that have tone to them. So like you pull out an EQ, and without doing an EQ, it has a sound to it, and maybe that sound is beneficial to tame it or soften it. There's for instance, if you have a screechy vocal, I don't know what this foghorn sounds like, I would have to hear it, but if you had like a female that was just belting the top of her lungs on let's say a gospel track on the bridge, and all the bottom end is just gone and it's just painful, her voice is just grating, then you could break out a plugin like the CLA 2A from Waves, the LA 2A compressor, because it has a weight to it and a low mid bump to it that kind of smooths things. And so I like finding tools like that that'll, without doing heavy processing, kind of lean a sound in more of a direction. So like the Acoustica L-Ray compressor has a heft to it and a smooth top, even though it's not an EQ, it's a compressor, but it just naturally has that sound. So I would probably search for things like that. And then again, working on that mid-range. Mid-range is the most important area in a mix, and a foghorn I feel like would be right in the middle of all that. So just finding those frequencies that are worth boosting, and those that need to be cut, and the ones that are pleasant and need to be highlighted, and then the level, you know, how important is it, you know, if something needs to be tamed and it's annoying and it's not the lead featured instrument, then it could probably be turned down, you know. So I would, depending on what else was going in the song, what kind of soundscape I had to work with, you know, I would maybe try to turn the fader down, you know.
Bob, you work with BTS. We talk about BTS on Clubhouse sometimes because it's an extraordinary amount of tracks. And it's a lot of work for somebody like you, like more than the usual, right? And
Yeah.
I've witnessed some of the conversations on Clubhouse about how about organization, improving productivity. Like you have, I mean, I'd love to, and we're at time now, so I'd love to have you come back, but just as kind of to wrap it up here, do you have any tips for producers in terms of organization, workflow? You know, somebody who mixes things like BTS. I mean, you got to be the master at stuff like that.
Sure. I mean, organization, it's super important. I think it should be so important to everybody. I mean, I can't tell you how many times people have lost files, or something gets deleted because they thought it was safe and to delete. And one thing I get every once in a while is people will have stuff on their desktop. The desktop of a computer is the most dangerous place for audio files, because if it's on your desktop, that means it's on your internal hard drive. and you don't want to be writing. You want to write files to your internal hard drive as little as possible. So if you're a producer with a laptop and you're producing and all your songs are on your internal drive, your computer is going to be slow in about 2 years, depending on how much music you do. And if you're always downloading, movies and stuff, and you keep writing and downloading stuff from the internet on your internal drive, you're going to screw up your computer. So like I'm looking at my computer right now. I have a hard drive that is strictly for downloads from the internet. So I go to my browser and I point it to download to this external drive. So the only time my internal drive gets written to is when it creates log files and when I install a new plugin or something, and then I immediately back it up. So my computer's as fast as it was when I first got it 2 years ago, So did I knock myself off my own question?
No, it's okay. And you're using
Uh-huh.
you're using an external hard drive for everything, all the
Everything.
everything that you're
Yeah, I have a samples drive with all my drum samples and any soft synth libraries, because that way when you're playing your grand piano synth plugin, it's pulling from that external drive, not the same drive that your program like Logic or Pro Tools is pulling from. So that's important. Then we have multiple audio drives. We have SSDs, which are faster than the old school HDs, but we have those too. And yeah, so songs go on those, and samples and synth libraries go on the other, and then the programs go on the internal drives, and it's all separated. It's all nice, and it all plays well with each other.
Yeah.
And then file naming, like people will send songs where there's no names to the files. There's audio 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's so bad for us because we have to listen to each file then rename it. So now the mix is taking longer when the client's asking for it quickly. It's like they're making it harder on us to give it to you quickly because we don't know the song. We're getting it for the first time as a mixer.
I mean, and the best way to do that is to just to write down, to label it as you go, so that when you're bouncing them out, they're organized.
Yeah, and if someone were to argue like, but they're in the creative moment and they don't want to do that kind of stuff, it's like, well, fine, do it after the fact, but do it,
right?
And then back to the desktop, I've seen people where they'll have a song on their external hard drive and they'll zip it and send it to me, and then I'll open it and half the files are missing. And then in Pro Tools, there's this nice feature where you can see where the file lives, what hard drive, and the missing files will show, oh, Mac HD from such and such name, whoever the person's name is. And that'll tell me that half of the files are on their desktop and they don't know. So I call them and hopefully they're still on the desktop. But some people feel like, oh, I copied that to the desktop and I used it, now I can delete it. So I've had instances where people lost half of their song because they thought it was all on their external, because they shifted it, moved it, making copies, but only half of it copied. And so file management and organization is incredibly important. And naming, having folders with the different artist names, if you're not the artist yourself, and having their songs in there, and then their next project having a new folder, maybe it's a new year, so it's artist name 2022, the organization is great. That way, if someone reaches out and they have an email that doesn't tell me who they are, or maybe they got a new email since I last talked to them, I'm like, who is this person? Because it's just a creative name and they didn't say who it was. They're just expecting me to know. And they're like, hey, where's that song? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, I don't know what they're talking about, but let me search my hard drives. And I find it because everything's labeled and organized. And, I might even ask them like, when did we do that song? Remind me. And they'll be like, oh, 2015. I'm like, okay, well, that's drive F. All my drives are labeled letters. I'm on G now since 2007.
Nice.
So,
wow.
yeah.
There you go, Bob. We're already over time. Can you stay about 10 more minutes?
Yeah,
okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Bob. Really appreciate you. Everybody, I mean, come on. Are we like enjoying this? Please give it up. Give it up for Bob. Okay, couple questions for you, Bob. One is, I have so many questions for you. So I'd love to have you back because I'm just thinking about all our Clubhouse days. We talked about how you start a mix, and I remember the topic of mixing around the vocal.
Yeah.
Do you mix around the vocal? Do you have like a certain process of how you mix? Is it always a certain way? Are you going with the
Yeah.
song?
Yeah. 90% of the time it's the same. And I don't take my own advice, but I suggest to other people getting the vocal in as early as possible. Um, a lot of the stuff I mix, there's multiple vocals, and it's just easier said than done. But I mixed a hip hop song the other day, and I put the vocal in almost immediately. And when you mix around the vocal, you're just not gonna get to that point at the end of a mix where um, you have all the instruments in. Now it's time to put that vocal in, and you can't sit it. It's either too loud, then you pull it down. Now it's too quiet, and you can't find that perfect space because you mixed it without the vocal. Everything's in the way. But being that I've done this a lot of times, I can do a mix and leave room for the vocal, almost the perfect amount of room. I guess I just have had a lot of practice, so I don't take my own advice, but mixing the vocal first sometimes is a good way to go. I typically do what I call the meat and potatoes of the song. So I'll get the drums, find out what the sounds are. I'll go through all the sounds, figure out what's the meat and potatoes. So if I lost everything else in the song and we had, the kick drum, the snare drum, the main hi-hat, the main bass, the main keyboard instrument, maybe an important melody synth, and the lead vocal. If I had that stuff, we still have a song, and that's what I'll mix. So I get through all that stuff, and I get it sounding good. I listen to it. Maybe if they sent me a rough mix, I'll reference that a bunch and see like where they like things panned, where they were living with it, and then around that stuff, I'll start putting in the ear candy. So all the little extra percussion and swell sounds and extra synths that really they're good textures, but they're not important to the songwriting of the song. So that's kind of my method. There are days where I just mix the entire instrumental first and get it done, and then slap the lead vocal in and get that in, and then the backgrounds. But usually I can do those when I've been given a really good rough mix to reference. So the whole time, this actually might be worth showing. Can I flip the camera? How do you do it? Oh, there we go. So here on my volume controller, I have these buttons on the side: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So what I do is I have final mix, rough mix, reference mix, meaning like a famous song where I really like the low end, or I like the overall sound. And I'll basically sit there all day and I'll get a new sound put in the mix, and I'm like, oh, where did they have it leveled? It's like, oh, it's a little quieter than I have it, and then go back to mine and adjust. So that's
great.
Yeah, that tends to be how I work 90% of the time.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Bob. Just to let everybody know, Bob is overtime. So last call for questions. Definitely. So get your questions in now. Bob, this is MPS. We started, I call you a founding member, Bob, because because I started the room, like the concept of the room around the time where we started chatting on Clubhouse. And yeah, I mean, you've heard me say this before. In the early days, it was me, you, and like 2, 3 other people. And, we're just talking about work and maybe not work. And I'm pretty open on Clubhouse, and I allow myself to be vulnerable and talk about my issues and all that stuff. And not everybody is. But one time we were talking about some health issues and how in this game, well, yeah, sure, for musicians, but a lot of times for engineers, producers who are sitting behind the screen and producing, it's really easy to spend 8, 10, 12, 14 hours a day on the
48.
computer for right. But something happened and it kind of changed things for you. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So 2020 October, I had a stroke, and I guess it was a medium level stroke, meaning that I recovered like 95%, and I got lucky because it could have been way worse. And that was from just my lack of taking care of myself. And like you said, just being in the studio, on average, the old way I used to work, I would spend 10 hours would be a short day for me.
Wow.
I would never have a 6-hour day, never have an 8-hour day. Like I would have 15 to 20-hour days regularly. And when the pandemic hit March 2020, I got the busiest I've ever been. And from March 2020 to October 2020, October 1st, I counted later, and I had mixed 120 something songs in
Wow.
that spring summer period. And every day was going to bed at 5, 7 a.m. and waking up when I could. And I would just keep going until I would try to wake up one day and I just couldn't. And then I would take that day off and then start again the next day when I would just have one whole day of sleep,
Wow.
And this is probably more, what made it bad was the way I ate. So lack of sleep, but also just an insane amount of calories and all the wrong things to be eating. So I would have fast food twice a day, no breakfast, and anything that I could just grab and eat at a convenience store. We have a 7-Eleven right down the street from the studio, and I would go there like twice a day and get stuff, and a lot of Coca-Cola. I would have probably 4 to 6 Cokes a day, and then on top of that, Red Bulls, and also a lot of water. I crave the water, but yeah, just an insane amount of soda and calories and sugar and fast food and everything fried. Be like a fried chicken sandwich for lunch and then a cheeseburger for dinner, and no home cooked meals. So yeah, it just all came to a head, and I had a stroke while mixing, actually.
Oh, jeez.
So yeah, and yeah, it was bad. It took about 3 weeks to get to the point where I started baby stepping back into work. So I would do like 4-hour days and just see how I felt, and then even if I felt fine, go home, and then about a year of 8-hour days, and then now I do long days again, but I tend to try to go home between 7 and 9 p.m. And if I work on a project that has a big deadline or something, like a BTS, something, that's, my full rate, and, it's a major label and it's good for my career. It fits all the check mark, good for the career, good money. I like the music, everything. Then, if they need it in a hurry, I'll do a long day, extra long day, but, also, when my wife's in town, I try to take Sundays off so we can do something. So I kind of changed my life, and try to have a little more balance, and I eat a lot healthier. There's a bunch of stuff I just cut out 100% from my world, and so much is better for it.
Oh, good. I'm so happy you made it through. And you're feeling good then now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Gosh.
Yeah.
Wow, Bob. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I mean, it's important to talk about because we chase that carrot. And it's like that next thing and the next, it's
Here's the punchline of all of that is when I came back and I started doing 8-hour days, nothing changed career wise. Like I didn't start getting less work or less money. Everything's exactly the same. The thing is, when people see that you're willing to stay at the studio till 4 a.m. making their stems for them because they claim to need the song the very next day, when they see you're willing to do that, they'll take advantage of it, because people are generally, they're set on what they need and what they want. Everyone else comes second, and that's fine. But when you stand up for yourself, which I'm notoriously known as a super nice guy, when you start standing up for yourself as an engineer and be like, no, I'm not going to go back to the studio at 3 a.m. and make your stems. It can wait till the morning, and I'll get it done, and you'll have it. You just told me, I'll do it, in a timely fashion. everyone is fine with it,
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
You'll be just fine.
the music emergencies, I came to realize aren't emergencies. And with these file sharing programs we have, you send somebody a song that they claimed they needed that moment, and then you see that they downloaded it the next Monday. Like, oh, you really didn't need it. You
Right.
just wanted it,
And it's not
So
worth the health risk.
exactly. So when you start to respect yourself, you realize other people start to respect you, and then they'll wait for you if they're engaged with you and they like what you do and they find you valuable. They're not going to hang up the phone and fire you, and they're not going to hang up the phone and call someone else when you've already started working with them.
Yeah.
So
Bob, last couple questions. I don't want to keep you too long
sure.
because you're already overtime here. In those 8 to 10 hours a day that you're working, do you get up and stretch? You're taking breaks?
Yeah. I take a lot of ear breaks, a lot of mini breaks, but I'm staying here in the chair. But then I also stretch. I should go outside more. I don't. I mean, if I go outside, I usually leave and go somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I like to take real dinner breaks. Like, I don't like to have, a sandwich here while I'm mixing.
Right.
Um, even if I bring the food back here to eat, I will put on television and not be watching the clock. If it takes
Right.
me a half hour to eat and I want to finish the television show, then that's fine. And then I go
Right.
back to work and, so
You take that break.
yeah.
Any general advice on layering vocals? When is it most useful, and when is it not advisable? Better for certain genres, panning, EQ tips when using layers? That's a big question, Gary. Before you answer, Bob, before you answer, just want to let everybody know, please follow everybody. Go to Bob's website, bobhornmixing.com. Follow him on IG, follow him on all the social media. Also, if you search his name on YouTube, you can see there's tons of free information, free stuff, free information, free resources from Bob. Did we lose him? We chased him away. So just to let everybody know, search Bob Horn on YouTube and see all the interviews that he has done with multiple people. I mean, tons and tons of people. Bobhornmixing.com is the website. And just as we're taking this little break while we get ready to wrap it up here, musicianspeersupport.com is our website. Please feel free to visit us there. We have our donate button. We have our Patreon going. So Bob just was telling them a little bit about your website. But yeah, in general, any general advice on layering vocals?
I would say the most important thing with vocals is to not do too much. And what easily is too much is too many melodies with background vocals. And you see a lot in R&B, but also pop. People will have a complicated instrumental, but then whoever's in charge of the vocal production will ignore the instrumental and just think about vocal parts. So there'll be melodies in instruments in the track, but then there'll be background vocals doing like a ascending line while the lead's doing its thing, and then there's a synth behind it doing a different melody line that has nothing to do with the others. And that's where stuff gets bad. And then you have people that take it a step further and you do this kind of row your boat layered vocal thing where this set of backgrounds starts a melody and a lyric, and then this one comes in and it's a counter, and it's really cool. But it's cool if you solo those two parts and listen to them together. And that's how the person thought about them. And that's why they did it, because they weren't listening and thinking of the whole song. And that's when layering is bad. If you're just stacking up unisons for doubles and harmonies, and they're all doing the same lyrics and the same rhythm, and they're nice and tight, then it really doesn't matter how many you do. I did a song back in 2005 for Brandy that had 96 vocal tracks. And when you listen to the record, it doesn't sound like it. It's just very thick with her voice, because it's done right. And then when you listen to her vocals compared to the instrumental, it all fits together. There's nothing that's too much. And that's the key. So you can do as much layering as you want. You just need to make sure your parts aren't conflicting with other vocal parts and the instrumental, which I can't tell you how many vocalists ignore the instrumental when they do their vocal production. They just hear the beat and the key of the song and the general thing, and they're not performing while listening to the drum fill, their tom pattern behind it, and getting their vocal like right in that pocket. Like all that stuff's important. That's why hip hop is so appealing to so many people, because it's empty. And it's one vocal with maybe a double or maybe an ad lib, and maybe the chorus has more stuff, but it's just empty. And it's so musical, and you enjoy it because you can hear everything. And a lot of people think more is better and less is more. My favorite example of that is Lady Gaga, Just Dance. And I didn't mix that song. I wish I did. That would have been cool. But I mixed the Dancing with the Stars version, and I got a hold of the multi-track. And I was so surprised when I saw it. It was like drums and not many, just a few drums, and then one big synth and maybe a bass, and then a few vocals. And that's all that song is. And that song was a mega hit, and everything can be so loud, because the more tracks you have in a song, the more you have to turn them down to pipe in to the final left and right, So the more you have, the more you got to turn down, the smaller it is. And that's why hip hop sounds so big, and Just Dance sounds so big, and punchy and everything. So when you think about layering, whether it's vocals or not, you just got to think about that. Like, always listen to what you just did and what was done before, and do your next overdub with all of that in mind. As far as was the second half of the question, EQ tips and stuff like
Panning
that.
and EQ tips.
Panning, I'm a hard left and right guy with background vocals. Occasionally I'll do my other area where I'll pan is like 40 and 40 when I don't want them wide. I kind of stay away from the whole thing where it's like, let's put this pair of backgrounds at 23 and 23, this pair of backgrounds at 52 and 52, and this pair of backgrounds at 80 and 80. All that does is make your mix sound less exciting and less wide. You can have 2 or 3 things, like have most of them at 100 and 100, and then this one pair at 40 and 40, maybe the low ones, because maybe they sound weird when they're spread too wide. But you don't want to go through a song and pan everything like staggered, like around like that, because it's going to make your mix not sound wide. Contrast is what a lot of mixing is about. If you want things to sound wide, you need some things to sound right up the middle, and then a lot of things hard left and right. If you want your mix to sound depth, you need a lot of forward to back depth. You don't put everything in reverb, because then everything's in the back. You need some things up front, so when you hear something with reverb that it sounds in the back, or even without reverb. You can have something sound in the back without reverb, but you got to have that contrast. Mixing is all about contrast. So, and then with EQ, it's really just dependent upon the mix and the style and the genre, and then your personal preference. I've mixed songs where I put a nice air on a vocal, and then the artist came in and was like, "Oh, I want more of a warm sound," and then you gotta pull that out. I'd say too much of any high end airy stuff is bad for vocals, unless you just have one of those. If you have tons of backgrounds and they're all airy and bright, you're not going to be able to take it in your ears. You're going to not want to listen to it. So mixing is so challenging, and there's a million moves you can do. And if you give 10 of us the same song, it would sound 10 different ways,
Yeah.
So that's
Oh
why
my
it's a
gosh.
lifelong pursuit,
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge and wisdom with us, Bob. Do you have a favorite chord? Some silly questions. Is today favorite chord today?
Favorite chord. Oh, let's go with
silly.
dominant 7.
Yeah, dominant 7. Yeah. Anything
Why
in
not? Why not?
particular? B flat dominant 7?
No,
Anything? Just anything.
no.
Any dominant
Yeah,
7.
sure.
Very cool. Well, Bob, would you come back and visit us again sometime? Because I have so many more questions, and I know
Of
that a lot of
course.
us would. Like some questions that I'd love to hear from you are common missteps from people who think they're super advanced, like things like that. We have some advanced people here, and they're leveling up, So I want to see, people like you can help them level up in a good way. That's like, trying to avoid some of those pitfalls. Like I just opened my own studio. I got my, my clients coming in, at people at that level. How can we help them? So you don't have to answer now, but that's just kind of a preview for next time. And big shout out to our buddy Gary Noble, who was going to join us, but maybe next time. So Bob, before you go, we're going to give you a couple rounds of applause. So everybody give it up one time for Bob Horn, the legend. I mean, come on. Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah, so please, everybody, research about Bob and his work and all the amazing music that he's done over the years, and make sure you follow him on all the social media channels. Bob, is there any last thoughts, last words that you have for the greater good of the group, greater good of the world?
Sure. Don't overthink it. It's music, like what you're doing, but when it comes down to the details of a production, since we're in the theme of studio and we'll stay on production, but when it comes to all the details, don't overthink it. Don't be afraid to collaborate and take other opinions. Remember that it's not final until it's released. So, don't be afraid to mix something 2 or 3 times. It's like whatever you have time for. Don't stress about it. Remember, there's always another song. Don't hold on to songs and keep them from the world because you're afraid you're not going to maximize the money. It's like, put them out there. It's like, so don't overthink it. Don't work from a place of paranoia. Don't worry about being like Beyonce or her or SZA, like be yourself. It's like, it's fine to follow styles, but don't copy and don't overthink.
Thank you so much. Really great advice. Thank you so much, Bob Horn, everybody. B-O-B.
Thank you for having me. It's fun.
Of course. Thank you, Bob. Bob Horn Mixing, right? Is your website, Bob? Do you have anything else
That's everything.
People to check out?
Yeah, everything is Bob Horn Mixing. IG, Facebook might just be Bob Horn. I don't really use Facebook that much.
Yeah.
It sits there.
Yeah.
But yeah,
IG is good.
IG is good. I think Clubhouse is the same,
Oh my gosh. Everybody has to follow Bob on Clubhouse because there's no way you can get that information anywhere else. And also on IG, because your IG is on fire, Bob, because you have some like hobbies. Like we didn't even get into any. I mean, maybe you have 3 minutes to stay for happy hour, so we can maybe talk a little bit. Do you have 3 minutes to stay for happy hour, Bob? Okay, so let's wrap up the recording, everybody. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining Musicians Peer Support, Bob Horn Mixing. One last applause for Bob Horn. Musicianspeersupport.com is our website. And if you're watching the replay, please comment below. Would you please just tell us that you've watched it and just let us know what you thought. We're going to wrap up the recording. Thanks, Bob. Appreciate you.
Thank you.